Yes, if I don't have the reminder slide, I likely will not remember to do it. But we record it. The training is archived on the LWVCO YouTube channel, and it's there is just sort of an ongoing resource for the LAC and those that are interested in the LAC. We'll be sharing a link after the fact. And if there are LAC members or prospective LAC members that were not able to attend today that you know of, please direct us to them or them to us, whatever works, so they can get a copy of the recording. We do like both our veteran members and our new members to have this information heading into the session. So the recording will be there for everyone's future use. All right, so we're gonna do that by saying a little bit about the LAC leadership and oh, I'm getting a message saying that my internet is unstable right on cue. I will turn off my video if needed, but I'm going to keep trying it this way until things go awry. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Andrea Wilkins. I'm the legislative liaison with LWVCO. I've been in the role since the 2017 session, so time has been flying, and it's always extremely interesting. I'm part of the LAC in Action and Advocacy leadership team. I have the wonderful support and guidance of Maud Norrell and Linda Hutchinson, the co-directors of Action and Advocacy for the LWVCO board. Linda is new to the leadership team, and we wanted to officially introduce her and thank her for taking on the role. I think we mentioned at our last meeting that Thalia Oster, who was serving in the position, has moved on to the LWVCO treasurer role, where her talents will be very, very helpful and appreciated. But that did open up a position with Action and Advocacy, and we're thrilled to have Linda step into that role. Linda can say a little bit more about herself, but I do want to make sure that everyone is aware that Linda started the News Access and Literacy Task Force. She studied the issue, wrote the position study around the research that the group did to get a new LWVCO News Access and Literacy position adopted. So we are extremely grateful for that work, and having that position available to us has been really critical to our advocacy efforts. So we really applaud Linda for that work. And with that, I'll turn it over briefly to let Maud and Linda say a couple of words and introduce themselves.
I'm just delighted to be here and delighted that we have such a great group of LAC of volunteer lobbyists. So with the depth of knowledge and experience in this group is just fabulous.
And I'm very honored and grateful to the trust you've put in me to take over this role, and I hope I can do a good job, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from Maud and Andrea, so thank you.
All right, well, thank you both. Let's see. So, Linda, I think you actually are going to take us through the first section of our slides for part 2 of our Advocacy and Lobbying Professional Development series. So I'll hand it back over to you, Linda.
Okay. So as Andrea said, this is Advocacy and Lobbying Part 2, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Colorado, Action and Advocacy, Andrea, Maud, and me. Okay, so we have after this meeting, we have one more professional development on January 3rd. That's a Friday from 9 to 11 in the morning. And if you want to go back over these previous meetings, there are recordings posted in our videos and also in the LAC toolkit, I believe. So, and then after January 3rd, the legislative session will start on January 8th. And then LAC meetings, the first meeting will be January 17th. They're always on a Friday from 9 to 11 every other week, except there may be an overflow meeting on January 24th.
This is Kathy Smith. Kathy Smith, are you on?
I am. Good
Okay.
morning, everyone. Just want to invite everyone to the Housing Task Force meeting on this coming Monday at 7 p.m. from 7 to 8:30 p.m. via Zoom. We're having a special panel about housing advocacy, and we're hoping that many of you can come and see kind of how the housing policy is shaped at the legislature. There's several boots on the ground groups that really sort of tag important gaps and policies that need to be made, and they work with the legislature to get these passed, and they have a big advocacy effort that they're always showing up to testify and providing great information. So we're hoping that you can join us to see how this kind of works. They'll be talking about 4 different housing related legislation that's going to be in this next session, and just meet some of these folks and learn how it works a little bit in the housing world. So hope folks can make it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I'll just piggyback on that a little bit to say that our returning LAC members will know that affordable housing specifically has been a huge focus for the legislature for the past couple of sessions, just given the state of affordable housing in Colorado and really the crisis level situation. So we do expect a lot of legislation and advocacy efforts in that area again this year. So we're really thankful to Kathy and the housing team to have put together this panel to really help us build our partner and advocacy coalition related relationships and learn more about what's to come in that area. Hang on, I've lost my cursor. I'll get us on the next slide here. There, so, sorry to interrupt, Linda. I'll again hand it back to you.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, so our agenda today will be questions from part 1, how to use league positions, stakeholder meetings, the basics of testifying, and then Maude is going to explain budget and Tabor. So does anybody have questions from part 1?
Does anyone remember part 1? Okay.
Well, questions are always welcome at any time. So you just yell at us if something comes up.
Yeah. Okay. So this is where you can find our positions in the program for study and action. That's the state position book, and impact on issues is the US position book. If you go to the link at the top of this page, it'll take you straight to where the league stands, and just scroll down. You'll see these 2 books, and there's a little bar in between where you can click on those bars to take you straight to the book, or you can go to the LWV website and the drop down for take action and where the league stands, and then go through all those steps. Okay, so you use the league position books, keeping in mind that we can only act on an issue if we have a position on that issue, and we have to act in a way that coincides with what those positions dictate. the positions are general statements that are to be broadly construed. We can use more than one position to justify a stance or an action. And you don't have to stay in your issue topic. You can go outside that issue and outside that topic area and use the positions within other areas. And if the impact on issues, everything references federal or issues, but you can apply those to the state level by just substituting state for federal. And I'll give you examples on the next one. So this is an example of a fiscal policy that in impact and issues, it says, the League believes that federal fiscal policy should provide for adequate and flexible funding of federal government programs, but you can insert state for federal and use that to support your stance. And there's also news access and literacy we have a local news position, but we also often use citizens' right to know. And I'll caution that citizens' right to know does not have one mention of news in it. It does not. So if you just go do a search in these position books for a certain word, you may not find what you're looking for. It's really a good idea. Nobody knows these positions by heart, so don't let them tell you they do, but go in and just become familiar with the issues we do have, for which we do have positions. And then you'll know to where you can possibly look. Okay, and then don't forget League principles. The principles are broad statements about League beliefs, and according to the newest impact on issues, they don't recommend using only these principles to support a stance, but you can cite the principles, but they all have positions, and it's best to, if you're going to cite a principle, go find the position and use that as well.
Okay, Maud, I think you're up on this one, shifting to stakeholder meetings.
Yes, and I just came off mute. So Tony is in a minute is going to talk to us about give us an example of stakeholders. Participating in stakeholder meetings is really valuable. Ideally both during session and during the interim when emerging issues are discussed and legislation is being formed. It's much easier to have input before a bill is introduced than to say, could we amend it, please? And this helps our state league take a more active role in important legislation. Our partner list is linked in the toolkit. Take it away, Tony.
Okay. It's really important to work with your stakeholder people and to keep up your contacts with them. As an example, we did Y and Z, the commissions for redistricting, and we have kept up those contacts since Y and Z have been put in place. And now we're working on vacancy committee. And it's a lot of the same people working on that. And because we've kept up our contacts with the people in that group, we're able to be invited, or they keep us on the list. And we're there to sit at the table to discuss what should be in a proposal on vacancy committees. So keep up the contacts is number one. I'm sorry about my voice. And the tricky part of working sitting at the table and working on a proposal is that many times there are conversations that don't deal with the lead positions. When you're doing this preliminary work, you can be a little bit flexible. You keep in mind the basics of the league and the positions that apply to the conversation, but you don't have to just sort of say, okay, this is the only thing I'm going to talk about. You can talk about some other things, you can ask questions. The purpose is to try to get as much league position into, or stances into the conversation to craft the proposal so it is something that is works for the League of Women Voters. So that's the main thing. It's a conversation, it's a brainstorming many times when you're at the table. Yes, be concerned about our positions, but also be concerned about what the proposal is going to do ultimately, and does it work towards our goals. So participation is really important. So make sure that, people know that you're around and you'd like to be able to participate in all kinds of proposals that are being suggested. That's it. Thank you.
So a couple of questions in the chat. Defining stakeholders. Stakeholders are those, and other people correct me, please, those people and organizations and groups that are impacted, that care about, impacted by and care about an issue. In housing, it includes the groups that Kathy's going to have at the Housing Task Force on Monday, Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, other groups that deal with affordable housing and homelessness, which is a long list in Colorado. For Tabor, it's us and Colorado Fiscal Institute and the Bell Public Policy. So that might give a little bit of an idea. The partner list and the new partnership or coalition request form are both in our toolkit. And we will send out, when we send out the link next week to this recording, we will also send out a link to the toolkit. So next slide. We've also been talking about, well, what happens if we want to sign, if we're asked to sign on to a bill when it's still in concept form? There may be a one-page fact sheet. There may or may not be a bill draft yet. We have a form for that too. So, which is also in the toolkit now, the template for that. We have been involved, some of us, for years. I think Tony has been involved working against Tabor since the 1980s. Is that right, Tony?
That's correct.
Yes. So we've been working in stakeholder meetings and coalitions against Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Tony, Jeff, and I will be in another anti-Tabor meeting this afternoon, looking at the very beginnings of what can we do to try to reduce the impact of Tabor. And thank you all who voted approving us joining that specific coalition, voted this week. So next slide. When talking with policymakers, This is going to be mostly legislators, could be the governor's staff. Occasionally it's the governor. Look for common ground, common good, active listening. Look for solutions, ways we can work together. And we have an example on the next slide of a meeting with policymakers from Kathy Wilson. Kathy, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Super.
I didn't realize I was going to be at the beginning here. I've had an opportunities to meet with policymakers, and that's been informative and exciting. My first foray into that was a couple of years ago when there was a bill to try to eliminate the assessments for social studies because they didn't do a whole lot. And they didn't impact a lot of students at that point. I was lucky enough to have Senator Janice Marchman as my state senator here where I live, and fostered a relationship with her. So occasionally I would ask for meetings with her, and it was always online, so it was convenient for both of us that way. And I told her, or I asked her with that provision as they discussed it, if this bill went through, if they could earmark the funding to go to the education fund and not to just disappear into nowhere, because assessment funding is significant. The other area that I've had a really interesting time with is with Senator Cutter, because she was the person who has put across bills to support local news. And that was my first foray with her. But then last year, she introduced a bill to protect our public libraries and our public school libraries. And I was asked to be on the stakeholder meetings with that group and testified with that group. That bill failed, but at the end of toward the very end of the session last year, she introduced another bill that took the public school element out of it and just had public libraries. That bill passed. It was very exciting to be part of that. And an update to everybody, I've been trying to see if she was going to introduce a bill on protecting the public school libraries, and got an email back yesterday saying it's just been drafted, and they asked me to be on the stakeholder meetings with them. So I'm on that list. So I'm excited that that is happening too. And I hope we can help to protect what's happening in our public schools compared to what's happening in other states' public schools. So yeah, I highly recommend doing that, because I think one of the one of the very positive things when you're in stakeholder groups and um, you're meeting with policymakers is that you're broadening your own understanding of issues, and because you're seeing perspectives that you may not have considered up until then.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Thank you. So one of our LAC members asked about, was it okay to publicly endorse a candidate for a particular office? We encourage league members to be politically active as individuals. But note, if you publicly campaign as an individual for a state legislative candidate and that candidate loses, would it be awkward during session to then lobby the person you campaigned against? we're not setting any rules. We just advise thinking, and if anyone has questions, comments, happy to have them here or in the chat. So we, again, deliberately are not setting any rules on LAC members' political involvement. Register, please. Volunteer lobbyists are required to register with the General Assembly every year. The registration form, the link to the lobbyist form is on the useful links page in the LAC toolkit. Andrea is going to go over that useful links page toward the end of this program today. Again, that link to the toolkit will be coming next week with the link to the recording and the PDF of these slides. We have, as you know, lots and lots of categories that we lobby on. The breadth of this organization, this group, is just heartwarming and impressive. Many of the bills, whatever issue group it lives in mostly, have a JEDI component. Please touch on that JEDI component when you're discussing bills in your issue groups and include that in your bill summary. The other point is we have one area that is still very thinly covered. Children doesn't usually have a lot of bills. But we would love another volunteer to step up and help cover those few bills in addition to whatever other issue area you have. And feel free to contact Andrea, Linda, and me. Should we register now? Yes, please. And it is always useful to try to make legislative contacts. If you have your own legislators or legislators you think might be working on a bill that you would be interested in. When looking at a bill, also please say, does this affect any other LAC issue area? And if so, please email that group. What does that group think? Which group should be lead on the bill? Do they like it and your group doesn't like it? Try to work that out, please, before we get to an LAC meeting or an LAC emailed vote. The child tax credit was obviously about children, but also a very fiscal revenue issue, and we collaborated. And Sutton has an example of a cross-issue bill that she worked on, transit-oriented communities, which touched on transportation and housing, which I think is on the next slide. Anne, are you here with us?
If I take myself off mute, I'm here.
Yay, thank you, Anne. Thank you for being willing to speak.
Okay, I'm going to discuss this bill that actually passed last year on housing in transit-oriented communities. And this was clearly a intersectional objectives with the housing group. And I worked with a housing group and I represented the transportation team to review and act on this bill. This was quite a large bill, had a lot of intersectional objectives of importance to our interest teams. And just briefly with some background, transportation is the primary source of greenhouse gas emission pollution in Colorado. And this pollution is driven to a great extent by personal vehicles. Also, combustion engines are a major source of air pollutants. Increasing transit ridership would make our state's investment in transit more effective. Also, With regards to housing, available housing may not be convenient to jobs, healthcare, and shopping and higher education. So affordable housing opportunities are often limited by local land use policies on housing density. All of these contributed to our discussions. The League has positions in these areas. The combined teams discussed and selected the positions that would be the most useful in analyzing and explaining our stance on this bill. And I paraphrased some of these to present to you. We believe, the League, that increased transportation alternatives should be available and that a system of transportation planning should be developed and implemented as part of land use planning. Air quality concerns should be integrated into land use and transportation planning, and the League supports reducing vehicular pollution and the development of energy-efficient transportation systems. We support policies to provide a decent home and a suitable living environment for everyone. Responsibility to achieve equality of opportunity for access to housing resides with government at all levels. Housing for low and moderate income families should be provided as part of all planned neighborhoods and communities. There were stakeholder meetings by Zoom held weekly beginning in December of last year, and the LAC members attended, but we did not have direct input into the bill, which had been drafted and pretty much finalized by the sponsors and by staff from the governor's office. But it was very useful for us to hear the pros and cons from various stakeholder groups and where our positions might align. After the bill was published, we agreed that the initial LAC stance would be to monitor. And the reason for this was that the housing team members had concerns about involuntary displacement of residents of an area targeted for development if this caused an increase in housing costs and that was not affordable. That is, there were insufficient guardrails in the bill. I did not provide testimony for the initial hearings in the House committees, but fortunately, the bill was amended in ways that addressed our concerns, such as providing a list of acceptable strategies for affordability to be included in planning, and by requiring a displacement risk assessment. So I gave brief testimony in the Senate Committee on Local Government and Housing. Briefly, I described how a typical trip on public transit emits 55% fewer greenhouse gas emissions per passenger mile than driving alone. That transit provides multiple resiliency benefits for communities, such as access to schools, jobs, and services, and helps to reduce household transportation costs. Responsibility in the nationwide effort to achieve equality of opportunity for access to housing resides with government at all levels. The bill passed the Senate committees and the Senate Committee of the Whole and was signed by the governor. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for a good example of a bill that importantly crossed two different issue areas and how you two groups work together and in coming up with a stance and changing your stance. I'm now going to turn it over to Andrea, who's going to talk about testifying.
Thanks, Maude. All right. So one of the key things that we do, and one of the most visible things that we do as LAC members is providing testimony before the legislative committees. When we do this, we, as we begin following a bill through the process, once we've decided that, this is something that impacts our positions, it's a priority for us, and LAC has voted to take a particular stance. If there's an opportunity to testify, and there's a point for us to be made where we can bring some insight and perspective, or perhaps a sense of local priorities, information that we might gather through our local league network, kind of illustrating how a policy plays out differently in different communities throughout Colorado. That's all really valuable information that we can bring to the table through testifying, to help inform the deliberations that the committee is engaging on around the bill. So we really encourage people to do that. There are many veteran LAC members that have been testifying for years, and this information will maybe serve as a bit of a reminder, but I know that there's a lot of expertise on this call where testifying is concerned, and I want to point that out because for newer members, I think there are a lot of resources beyond just me, Maud, and Linda as far as testifying. So please look to, some of those newer members can look to our more veteran members for support within your issue area teams, if that makes sense. If there's anything that I miss in talking about testifying that our veteran members would like to jump in on and point out, please feel free to do that. The process can feel, I think, a little intimidating if you're not familiar with it, but it really isn't complicated. I think it's a matter of just kind of understanding what the steps are and, knowing what's expected of the process to, really just kind of work through that. And so we hope to, sort of demystify this for any new members that might be feeling a little hesitant about testifying. I think really the key thing to remember is that we do need to be brief in our comments. If there are conversations that we want to have with bill sponsors that are more involved and lengthier, that's maybe something better for another venue. In terms of testifying, we want to primarily be going on record as to what position or stance that we've taken on the bill. And we want to reference why it's important to us as an organization and how we think it's important for policy development in Colorado. So those are kind of the key things that we want to get out. You typically, as a general rule, testimony needs to be 3 minutes or less, but it is certainly not uncommon for the chair to limit testimony to 2 minutes, particularly in cases where there's a whole lot of people signed up to testify on a bill. So as you're structuring your remarks, keep those time limits in mind. It's really, I think, important to go in with some notes. A lot of people will read their testimony verbatim. You'll see that happen in, example after example as you go in. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because, we want to be very specific and intentional about the messaging that we're bringing to the testimony. And it's really important for us to stay on topic. So we want to be really clear about, our position and, why we think this is important and what our ask is. Essentially, ultimately, we're going to be asking members of the committee to either support or oppose the measure, depending on how we've come out on it. And we'll give some information and perspective as to, why we've taken that position. It is, I think, important to, stay away from jargon as much as possible. Some of the bills are really technical. And, that can be a bit of a challenge when you're dealing with, a really complex or technical policy area. But I think it's important to keep in mind that legislators may not have the in-depth expertise that you do. A lot of times they don't. They're dealing with a whole lot of topics and they can't be an expert on every policy issue that comes before them. So I think the more everyday language, the clearer that we can be in our messaging, the better off we are. Same thing goes for acronyms. People that are really familiar with a policy area will be familiar with the acronyms, but many of the people in the room, committee members included, are not going to be familiar with that. So again, as part of being as clear as we can, making our message as accessible as possible, we want to stay away from any acronyms or technical language that might complicate the message that we're trying to bring. We do, of course, want to incorporate league positions in our testimony. As Linda mentioned early on, we don't take a stance on legislation that we don't have an organizational position on. So really our testimony and our approach to advocacy on a particular bill is going to be guided by our organizational position. So as you're structuring the testimony, it really makes sense to build around that. That's not to say that you can't, have a storytelling aspect to it. If you've got personal stories that you can speak to directly, or community examples, anything along those lines, constituent specific stories. If you're a constituent of anyone on the committee, it's always great to point that out. And if you can kind of draw on, specific examples within, the committee members' constituency, that's always a good thing to do. So kind of be thinking about those things, what's possible to bring to the table to really get the attention of the committee members and really help drive your point home. There's a lot of different ways you can structure testimony. Just think about how you can be as persuasive and as clear as possible when we're there to kind of convey a particular position. It is helpful to bring written copies of your testimony to hand out. It's sometimes useful to do that in conjunction with delivering your written testimony, but I will say it's also especially helpful if you find yourself in basically a never-ending committee hearing. We understand that you all are volunteers. People have got a lot of demands on your time, and some committee hearings do go on for many hours. They can go late into the night, and it's not always feasible to be on hand, through the end of the testimony period. So I don't want to scare anyone off. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. So having that written copy on hand is helpful, because if you do find yourself in a situation where you just can't stay until the end and you haven't gotten the opportunity to testify, you can pass that on to the Sergeant at Arms to distribute to the committee members as well. Also helpful to, if you have a fact sheet that helps you kind of summarize the issue or summarize our stance on it, anything that might be setting out policy solutions or, some additional research or cost benefit assessments that you think you want to incorporate into your remarks, it can be helpful to have that in hand, maybe your sources, that sort of thing. Sometimes that is something that, can, relying on your sources or citing, research or expertise can be something that you might want to build in. Celeste, I see you have a hand raised. Please jump in.
Tom is ignoring me on the computer.
You mentioned the Sergeant at Arms, and for giving the Sergeant at Arms testimony. You can also email testimony, of course. But another thing you can do is, if it's going to be a particularly long hearing, I have given my LWV business card to the Sergeant at Arms with a little note written on the back to the chair of the committee saying, "Can I please go first? I waited 4 hours at the, in the house, and I have somewhere else I need to be." And, I happen to know the chair. He was in my county, and, so he called me up next. It was great. So feel free to communicate with the chair via the Sergeant at Arms in a written form.
Thank you, Celeste. Those are some really great tips. The Sergeant at Arms, like I said, it it's a formal process. You go into these rooms and it can look kind of intimidating, but they really are there to assist. You know, the point of testimony is to get public input. And so, you know, it is certainly an option to rely on the sergeant at arms to, you know, kind of help facilitate things. So, and, you know, I will say that I think legislative staff, the staff at the Capitol, for the most part, I think is very friendly and very helpful. So thank you for raising those points, Celeste. I think those are some really great tips.
And these are, if you are able to be there in person, and we know that some of you live a little further away than easy commute distance to the Capitol, which is why Andrea is going to talk about online testimony.
Right. That is a fantastic segue into our next slide. One of the things that, you know, I just love about some of the work that's been done over the last few years in terms of accessibility and opportunities for public input is the huge expansion that we have seen in remote testimony options. Basically, anybody with an internet connection and the ability to get on Zoom can testify pretty much from wherever, any part of the state. You know, it is best, you know, to be in kind of a quiet place, so, you know, there's not distractions going on. But you know, basically, if you can get on Zoom, you can testify. Well, and I shouldn't even just say any part of Colorado. You know, you can, if you find yourself somewhere else too, you know, the ability to call in and provide testimony really has just been made very, very easy by the General Assembly. And I think that's been a great thing for public participation in the policy development process. So please don't let proximity to the Capitol hold you up. You know, the process for signing up for remote testimony is actually really easy. Might be a little confusing if you're, you know, doing it for the first time. Please know that you can always reach out, and we are happy to help you do that if you get stuck. But here's just, you know, sort of a screenshot of the web page that you will see. There's a link here that will take you to the remote testimony sign up page. You can choose your option. You know, in terms of whether you're testifying in person or if you're testifying remotely. If you want to submit written testimony, you can, you know, select all of these things. And then from there, you kind of just follow the prompts. You'll need to enter your name, position on the bill, what organization you're affiliated with, and then contact information. I mean, I think in terms of you know, personal contact information, entering your personal email is going to be really key, because that's where they're going to email the confirmation that you are in fact signed up. The Zoom link will be there. I know some people in the past have been a little hesitant to list phone numbers. If you've got some hesitancy about that, you know, you are welcome to use the office number. But otherwise, you know, just kind of follow the prompts, and it really should be a pretty straightforward process. But please don't hesitate to reach out if you do have any trouble or if you have some questions. Okay, so just talking through a little more about testifying in person, online. I think okay, so I mentioned, you know, testifying when you're signing up, you know, you're going to have to provide your position on the bill and the organization that you are with. And then when it comes time to actually be called up, whether you're doing it online or whether you're in the committee room in person, you just wait for them to call up your name. And then once you get situated, whether you're going to the front of the room to actually sit at the testimony table, you'll likely be up there with a few other members of the public that are there to testify as well. If you're on Zoom, you'll see the screen get brought up, and you'll have the ability to take yourself off mute, and start speaking. You do want to wait for the committee chair to officially recognize you and let you know that it's okay to proceed. So then you would introduce yourself and your organization. When we address the chair and the committee members, we usually structure our testimony in kind of a standard way. We've got some sample testimony in the toolkit that you're free to basically just, kind of copy paste and, personalize and customize in any way needed. But we typically will address the chair as Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. We always try to be very courteous and professional through the process. So it is nice to also thank the committee for the opportunity to speak and present our position. Peggy, I see you have a raised hand. Please jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to amplify the point about wait for permission to speak, because sometimes it's a little jarring when they ask you a question and you need to actually wait for the committee chair to give you permission to answer it. So just be aware of that.
That's a great point, Peggy. I think the main thing is just, I know like in situations where, it's an unfamiliar environment, or if people are feeling a little nervous, the reaction I think can be to kind of just launch in and like get everything out. I think it's important to just kind of pause, slow down, just make sure that you're listening, because they'll prompt you when it's time for you to speak each step of the way, whether that's the beginning of your remarks or waiting for your response from a question. So I think if we're just kind of keeping an ear out, trying to pace ourselves, you'll catch all those prompts. But it is great to know going in that you always need to be recognized by the chair before you start to speak. Kathy, please go ahead.
Yeah, one of the rationale for that is this is going into public record, and if they have the name of who's speaking at each point, then it's better for everybody because it's in public record.
Yeah, that's an excellent point as well. And it just helps people that are following along remotely on the audio. It helps them to, when they're listening live, to kind of get a sense of who's saying what, and it just helps things track better. So it really is a pretty orderly process. It's just, is one of those things where, once you know that you need to do these things, it sort of comes as second nature. But for anyone that's new, just be sure to listen and they'll prompt you along the way. All right. So with, with the substance of your testimony, you will often find that, particularly if it's a topic that a lot of people are testifying on, it's not going to be uncommon to hear similar remarks brought forth by lots of other members of the public or, other stakeholders. It is important, I think, to, get our position on record and some rationale for why we feel that way. That rationale is going to be built around the LWVCO position, or LWVUS, whatever we're using as the support for the stance that we've taken, and kind of building out the rationale from there. So I think that's always important to get across. But if you've got other aspects of your testimony that you've heard mentioned 20 times at that point, feel free to cross that out in your testimony and basically just say that, you agree with some of the previous points that would have been made. You won't necessarily get into that again, but that you do want to urge, whatever particular action that you're asking for. So, we do often kind of edit on the spot. It's just a way of trying to reduce redundancy. And I think it's probably very appreciated by the committee members because testimony can get really redundant when there's many, many people there. So, feel free to whittle that down if there's repetitive points, and just say that, you agree with the points that have been made previously, and you want to urge whatever position it is or action that's, we've come to the table to request. It may be appropriate to ask questions of the committee if there's something about the legislation that we feel like really has not been fully considered or fully addressed. It's helpful to raise that, just, kind of pose, we, have contemplated, X, and, would just like the committee to take that into consideration. It's hard to give a solid example there because, it's obviously going to vary a lot by, from bill to bill, but feel that it is entirely appropriate for you to kind of plant those questions if you feel like there's some unanswered questions that really need to be thought through to make the policy a little bit more sound. And then we do request that you send a copy of your testimony to me. It's really helpful. We end up posting that on the legislative action page of the LWVCO website. It's a way of, just kind of publicizing our advocacy efforts for the public, for the legislature, for our membership. They can see, what we've asked the legislature to do on particular pieces of legislation. And we really love to highlight all the great work that you do. So please remember to send that along to me, and we will definitely get that posted.
Also, let Andrea know if you were able to testify in person or via Zoom, or had to send in written testimony, and the date and the committee. That helps us also.
Yeah, it just kind of helps us organize things. And anyone that's interested in looking at our testimony, it gives them an easy way to find, whatever topic they might be interested in seeing what our advocacy efforts look like. All right. One of the things that we know people get super nervous about, particularly new members of the LAC, is, the potential for getting asked questions once your testimony is complete. I will say typically that doesn't really happen. I will say it's not impossible, of course. But for the most part, I don't think that we are getting a lot of questions. You will hear people that are there to testify in kind of an expert capacity, or, oftentimes there'll be department officials that are going to be responsible for implementing the legislation. If it's passed, they'll be there in a questions only capacity. So you will see a lot of questions going back and forth between the committee and some people that are there to speak to the issue or provide testimony. But for the most part, citizen groups such as ourselves don't get asked a ton of questions. So, know that, it's probably not something that you're going to encounter all the time. But if you do get asked a question, the answer off the top of your head, please feel free to give that information. If you don't know, it's perfectly okay and recommended instead of venturing a guess that might be inaccurate, to just say you don't know. And that's not uncommon either. You'll hear other people do that as well. We just offer to follow up with the information, and we would urge you to not forget to do that, because we do want to be true to our word on that. So if you're asked a question that you can't answer in the time, just make a note of what you need to follow up on and who asked the question, so you can get that information to the committee and or the particular legislator after the fact. We do want to be very clear and assertive in our positions, but we also want to be respectful. I think particularly given the climate that we're in right now, we want to learn how to disagree better. So, it's okay to disagree about issues, but we want to make sure that we're doing that in a civil and constructive way. We never want to be seen as attacking the person or, certainly not the members of the committee. So just, we don't have doubts that any of you can handle this just fine, but just sort of a blanket reminder. And then the other thing I will say is that, when it comes to policy development, persistence is often the name of the game. It does require a degree of patience. There's going to be things that we feel passionately about that sometimes don't go our way. But, we keep pushing on. We can follow up if, we're feeling very strongly about a particular bill that ends up not passing. We often will follow up with the sponsors to see if there's going to be a renewed effort next session, you know, if there's maybe a slightly different tack that can be taken to accomplish the same thing. You know, we just kind of have to be thoughtful about it. If, you know, a particular policy does not pass in the way we like, or it does pass and it's something that we were opposed to, you know, we just want to continue to follow the issue and, you know, think of how we can continue to weigh in and shape either the policy development or, you know, the implementation and oversight to, you know, try and steer things towards, you know, furthering our positions in any way we can. All right. Hang on, I'm juggling a couple of different things on my screen. Celeste, please jump in.
So there are two houses, the state house and the state senate. So also you can make changes in the second house if you haven't made, or, you know, request a change in the second house, and the second house might be more amenable to the league's proposals than the first house. And it does have to pass both houses. So I've often testified in both chambers, so I recommend you keep up with the bill the whole way. Sometimes amendments are made on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate, and there's no space for public testimony at that time, live public testimony. Of course, you can write to your legislators, but that's a lot of legislators, but I've done it.
Thank you, Celeste. That's a great point as well. This is why I love it when our veteran members jump in, because there's lots of on-the-ground experience that is just so helpful as a reminder and new information for those that are new to the process. Yes, there are two houses. They both have to pass it. The perspectives are likely to be somewhat different. So, you know, Celeste raises a good point that you might get a little more traction in one chamber versus the other. There may be some opportunity for some tweaks and changes that weren't possible in the chamber of origin. So always keep that in mind. And it also reminds me that we do really want to emphasize that testimony in both houses is preferred. We do want to follow a bill through its process. So basically, you know, once we've decided to take that stance on it, you know, we want to continue to follow it through, you know, all the way through its house of introduction, as it crosses over, goes into the other chamber. And then if there's any reconciliation at the end of that process, amendments that need to be reconciled between the two chambers, we want to follow that and, you know, all the way through to final passage and the signature of the governor. So, really important point that testimony in both houses is beneficial and highly encouraged. Kathy, please jump in.
I just want to say, and I'm assuming this is going to happen this year, in past years, we've been, we get on a service that tells us when committees are going to be hearing, you know, bills we're interested in. And that's been really helpful, so we can calendar them on our own, you know, personal calendars as well, and just keep track of bills a little bit more easily, because there are a bunch.
There are a bunch, and or, you know, even if you're only following one, sometimes, particularly at the end of the session, it can be a little tricky to keep up with them and know, you know, when things are going to appear. So Kathy raises a great point. We do use bill tracking software that will give you email alerts for the bills in your issue area. That's something that will continuously update through the session. I'll make sure that everybody in your issue area team is getting the alerts for the topics, the bill topics that we've taken a stance on or chosen to follow in that area. So you should receive, it'll probably be fairly frequent updates as the legislation starts to move, particularly if the group is following a lot of legislation. But you'll see email come through from Colorado Capitol Watch that basically tells you, you know, what's going to be heard that week of your list of bills. So you'll have a sense of when those are coming up for hearing. It's great to mark those on your calendar. And this is an area where coordination with your issue area team is really important. Likely at the beginning of us deciding that we're going to follow a bill and we just decide on the stance, the issue area teams have probably figured out amongst themselves who's going to be kind of the key point person on that bill. And if that person can testify and be the kind of lead in following it through, that's great. But we also know that schedules sometimes don't allow for that. So if you need to look to somebody else in your team to testify, that again is the beauty of the issue area teams. So yeah, just kind of keeping track of the schedule and coordinating with the team as you go along is really sort of the name of the game there. It is important to note that the General Assembly does allow written testimony. You might recall when we were on the sign-up page that there was that option to submit. That's something that we certainly can do, and we do frequently. But we also want to note that legislators do really get inundated with communication, and some have specifically told us that they really don't have time to read testimony and give it the attention that we would like to see them give it. So we do really encourage people to testify live, whether that's in person or via Zoom. We know that that's not going to necessarily be the decision of the group for every bill. It just may not be necessary for some bills. Maybe written testimony does make more sense, or if it's a situation where we're monitoring, maybe we don't even do that. So it's going to be very bill specific, and it's something that you all will work out in your issue area teams. But testifying is one of the most visible things that we do, if not the most visible. And, it's a way for our position to go on record. It's a way for the stakeholder community to see us. And I think the more that, they can hear our contribution directly, the more they see us participating in the testimony process, that's just another way that gets us involved in those stakeholder conversations early on in the game, because we're recognized as a player on, that legislation in whatever topic that you're dealing with. And that gives us the opportunity to weigh in on policy development from a very early stage where we can be most influential. So there's a lot of reasons that, we really prefer that live testimony, but we do understand that sometimes written is going to be the strategic decision of the team. So, we get that it's not a one size fits all approach, but please know that testimony options, whether in person or via Zoom, are, always pretty accessible now that Zoom has been expanded so much. And if, anybody feels like they want support with that, please just let us know. All right, here we have got a screenshot of, just one of the General Assembly pages that will kind of show you the navigation to help you kind of keep track of things. You'll see the interim committee schedule there at the top with bills, the committee tab. You've got your options for watching or listening to the proceedings. Basically just a lot of different information here that kind of helps you follow legislation through the whole process, from introduction to its committee hearings to the budget process, and what's happening with that and how it the discretionary spending helps or how it impacts, bills that you all might be considering. So just a wealth of information. I think that probably most everyone is fairly familiar with navigating the General Assembly page, but if there's any particular information that you're searching for that you can't locate, let us know. We can likely help direct you to it. And then also know that through our bill tracking system, Colorado Capital Watch, there's also a wealth of information there. I believe we're going to be getting into that a little bit in our third professional development session. So more information there to come, but we want to just kind of flag that all of this is here for people as a really great resource. All right. I briefly mentioned the budget, and we will use that as a segue back to Maud to talk more extensively about the state budget.
And Celeste, you have your hand up and you're on mute.
Yes. I wanted to say one more thing about testifying, and that
Yes.
is that after the testimony phase, that's when they have the amendment phase of a bill. And you hope that when you're testifying to the language of the bill, but sometimes the testimony is all for naught because they have decided to have a strike below amendment, which changes the entire bill. And ideally, you've developed a relationship with the bill sponsor and you've gotten a copy of that strike below amendment. And sometimes during the testimony phase, you'll hear people say, I'm speaking to the amendment that I expect to be proposed, you know. So just be aware of that. It's very frustrating if your testimony all comes to naught, and then you don't know if the league is actually going to support the bill or not support the bill until you see the whole strike below amendment. So there are moments of frustration, and just be patient, and I wish you all well.
So Celeste, thank you. And even without a full strike below, there could be some pretty major
Yes.
amendments. Kathy Wilson, you have your hand up and you are on mute, off mute.
Yeah, I just have one other thing to add. If you have been talking to the member of the legislature about a particular bill and have made a suggestion, one of the things that happened with that social studies bill that I was talking about earlier is that between the committee meeting and it was passed in the committee meeting, and between that and when it went onto the floor, what I suggested, what the league was suggesting as a change happened during that in between time. So you have to kind of keep up on what amendments go into a bill, because you're never quite sure when they're going to show up too.
Thank you, Kathy. So many of you know I spent most of my paid career in another state's budget office. Sandy, you have another question.
I just wanted to say thank you for making it sound a little bit more like what it really is. It's very frustrating at times and it's very confusing. You have to hang in there.
Absolutely hang in there, and we're all willing to help walk newbies through the process. Or if you're an oldie but you haven't been testifying and now realize that that's really the way to get your voice heard, we're happy as well. So shifting gears a little bit, many of you know that I spent most of my paid career in another state's budget office, and it is interesting to see how Colorado process works. If you want to know what the state's priorities are, look at where it puts its dollars. Look at the budget. Executive branch departments send their budget proposals to the Governor's Office of State Budget and Planning and Budgeting in the late summer, early fall. Then the governor and their staff take out their scissors and trim proposals to fit the governor's priorities and the amount that's available to spend. I've seen several hands out for every available dollar in my career time. Executive and judicial budget requests go to the Legislative Joint Budget Committee, the JBC, by November 1st, and JBC staff then brief the JBC on their budget requests. Next slide. The JBC, Joint Budget Committee, holds hearings with departments. Both the briefings and the hearings are open to the public, and they're recorded, but there's no public testimony. Maybe public testimony will be allowed at later JBC meetings. In January, the JBC looks at department requests to supplement the current year budget. Celeste, You're on mute.
I just want to say, my newly elected my senator-elect is on the JBC, Judy Amabile. She was on the state representative, and she's meeting every day, all day, right now. And it's crazy. It's going to be a very difficult budget year coming up. So that's a very high, that's considered a leadership seat. JBC stands for Joint Budget Committee. I don't know if we said that. And like the JBC members have their offices where the JBC meets, not so it's not where all the other legislators have their offices. It's kind of interesting. And I think is it behind closed doors even? Like there's somebody you can leave a message with? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right, Celeste, that it's usually not super direct where you just walk back there, which is what you can do in the other cases.
Right.
Yeah. So departments will sometimes have something that happens. I mean, suppose we had a huge increase in the number of prisoners, then that department would say, during this current year, we need more money. So JBC considers that. They have to keep the budget balanced so that they might have to cut elsewhere in the current year budgets. The supplemental bills are introduced as a big lump in February. Next, yeah. Then once they've processed the supplemental, JBC turns back to next year's budget. In this case, the one that starts July 1st, 2025. And they do figure setting, setting the spending amounts, the funding sources, the state employee numbers, and then footnotes for the long bill, i.e. the appropriations bill, that explain the purposes of the appropriations. After the figure setting, departments may say, oh, but please, they may submit comeback requests asking JBC to reconsider some of their decisions. At least quarterly, JBC gets overviews of projected revenues and spending limits compared to whatever the current budget draft is, if it's the governor's request, the JBC figure spending, or decisions that the General Assembly is making. The major appropriations bill, the long bill, is introduced in late March or early April. Watch for related bills, changing existing programs or making new ones to comply with changes in the budget. The JBC staff does a long bill narrative, which summarizes the whole budget package. JBC presents the package to party caucuses and or committees of reference. The long bill may be amended while passing through the House and the Senate. Once it's through, the governor can veto an entire line item, but not partially veto a line item. The governor can't say, oh, I only want 10 million for this and not 12 million. That cannot happen. It could just be 12 million or zero. After session, JBC staff prepare an appropriations report. Fiscal notes, we will see these during session. They don't come out generally as soon as a bill comes out. It takes a little while to prepare a fiscal note. I've been on the other side. They're done as quickly as possible, but it still takes some research to figure out how much will this bill cost the state, which is what a fiscal note answers. Interestingly, the bill summary in the fiscal note can be more helpful than the summary that the bill drafters write in the bill text. It can also be more up to date. Check the date on the fiscal note. If the bill has been amended, that summary could be more up to date as well. If your bill has a fiscal note, it is likely to get stuck in appropriations in its first house until the long bill is introduced. because legislators don't know how much money will be left over to fund fiscal notes until the long bill comes out and JVC says, okay, there's now a pot of money of so many dollars for all the fiscal notes for all the bills that are stuck in appropriations. Sponsors may well work to amend their bills to get rid of the fiscal note or get the fiscal note much, much lower. In the 2025 session, there may be very little cash available to fund our fiscal notes on our bills because of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, TABOR, which the state league has only hated since the 1980s. TABOR limits the amount of revenue the state of Colorado can retain and spend from taxes and fees. That TABOR cap grows by inflation and population growth. The Colorado budget woes for the coming fiscal year, 2025 to 2026, are not from lack of revenue. They're from the TABOR cap. The state will be giving back hundreds of millions of dollars in refunds that TABOR won't allow Colorado to spend.
Hey, just to interject about it, I recently was reading, I want to say it was Jeff Bridges that said it, but I wouldn't swear to that. Maybe somebody else knows. But I thought it was funny. There was a quote that I had come across recently that's he said, "TABOR is why we can't have nice things."
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. TABOR is why we can't have nice things. Thank you, Andrea. So in years where there are TABOR refunds, anything in excess of that TABOR cap, any revenue that comes in excess of that TABOR cap, has to be refunded to Colorado taxpayers, and it has to be refunded from the state's main checking account, the general operating fund, the general fund. Even if it's the fees that went up rather than general fund revenue, the refunds have to come from the general fund. TABOR does not dictate how the refunds are made. They've varied over the years, including flat amounts for taxpayers, larger refunds for those with higher incomes, checks mailed out, or refunds folded into the calculations in our individual income tax returns. TABOR requires voter approval for any tax increase or increasing the TABOR cap. Fees can be increased by the state legislature without voter approval, which is why several years ago there was a bill that had 1 million little fees to fund highways and other transportation infrastructure. It was fees, not taxes. In 2025, voters approved resetting the TABOR cap, increasing it, but then going forward, keeping it to a population and inflation increase. That new cap is that referendum that voters approved was referendum C, so the new cap is referred to as the Ref C cap. This next slide has a lot in it. The blue bars are taxes and fees, revenues and fees, taxes and fees. The orange line is what the TABOR limit would have been without the referendum C cap. The black line is above the orange line is the Ref C cap on TABOR. All the little pieces of black bar above the black lines are TABOR refunds. You can see we've had a couple of years of very, very historically huge TABOR refunds. And then the legislature started diverting revenue before it reached state coffers, before it could be subject to a TABOR cap or a TABOR refund, by granting tax credits particularly for housing and for low-income individuals and families. Tax credits, also known as tax expenditures. So our TABOR refunds in the future may well be smaller. Any questions on budgeting, TABOR, why so we hate TABOR because there's all this revenue that could be used to make life better for Coloradans. In all of us can think of ways, many ways it could be used, but instead it has to go back to taxpayers because of TABOR. And so many of our state programs are not getting the funding they deserve. Any questions on this? Everyone's asleep. Okay, over to Andrea, who will wake you up.
Well, I'm not sure if I will wake you up or not, but we do want to make sure that everybody knows there's an LAC toolkit out there, and probably the easiest way to get to it is this link on the slide here that will take you to the information that is stored in a shared drive. We have recently gone through and updated the information. I think everything but the date at the top. So even though it says January 2024, I think it's ready to go for January 2025. But if anybody notices anything that is out of date, please let us know. But I think we're good to go. This is intended to be just kind of a one-stop for a lot of the information that you might need as you work through the session. There's good information in here that I think can be sort of a refresher for our more veteran members, and hopefully good educational material and a lot of resources for our newer members. Some of the things that are in here are things that we've already gone over, like the General Assembly website and the bill and committee related resources. That's kind of, a first stop for a lot of information. Information on how to sign up for remote testimony, some of the links for tuning in to the committee hearings or the floor sessions remotely. So a lot of this stuff you have seen. But then there's also, kind of more general information, like this video that General Assembly staff have put together on the process for a bill becoming a law. Just sort of the journey that happens with a particular piece of legislation, how to participate in legislative hearings, of course, the calendars and committee schedules. So we hope that this is an easy resource for everyone to use. Something that I think is kind of fun is the legislative lingo page that I think it's the Office of Legislative Legal Services staff that have put this together. It provides some handy definitions for some sort of strange, not everyday terms that you hear out in the real world, but you do hear a lot in the legislative arena. So if you hear something reference that you think, I don't know what they're talking about there, this legislative lingo page is a good place to go because it likely has the answer for you. There's information on the state budget process if you want to delve deeper into some of the information that Maud has provided. The amendment process, which can be a little mysterious until you get familiar with it. So that's a really great resource if you've got questions there. And then we've got some LWVCO specific information, links for our position books, for our organizational positions, LWVUS position book, just trying to make all of those handy for people. So yeah, are there any questions on any of that or anything else that we have discussed today?
Can you put the link to the toolkit in the chat? Thanks.
Just did. I put the link to useful links and the whole toolkit, which contains it.
Thank you.
Maud.
And there was a question in the chat. Some folks went to the Siegel Long Budget 101 presentation webinar on Tuesday. I don't know if they record that.
They didn't record it.
They
but-
did not record it.
No,
Okay.
but for the people who were registered for it, they said they would send the PowerPoint. I was kind of disappointed that they didn't record it because I had to leave for a task force meeting in the middle of it.
Okay.
And it was good. It was quite helpful.
Good.
I couldn't
Good,
find
good.
the link after such a long time. It was lost in my email somewhere.
I have a folder. I have an email folder called meetings, and anytime I get a Zoom link, it goes in that folder. And that's slightly increases the chance that I will actually find the Zoom link.
One other thing I'll say about the toolkit, just as we were kind of talking through questions, I did forget to mention that there was the useful links page that we kind of went through, but then there's other things in the toolkit that excuse me, that you can access for support in your job as an LAC member. Things like sample testimony, sample bill summaries that you'll use as you present a bill to LAC and request a vote for the stance that we'll take on the bill. Our newer form that Maud mentioned earlier on about bill concepts. So early on in the session, if we're approached by groups that are working on legislation, but we don't have a draft to review, but we think that this is something that we want to weigh in on and potentially get behind, the issue area team that is dealing with the stakeholder community can use that form to provide a summary and give LAC hopefully enough information to make an informed vote about proceeding with a concept in the case that of us not having a draft yet. There's other things in the toolkit too that I'm sure are escaping me right now. But anyway, Ma dropped the link in. The link is also in the slides. So, please know that that's a resource available to you. If anybody runs across things that they feel like, oh, we could really use like a template or a resource on this, let us know, because we're always kind of trying to build up the toolkit. And it really is an evolving and living document or resource. Kathy Ebsberger, please jump in.
Yeah, you talked about registering as a lobbyist. Is there a waiting period before we actually make contact with the legislators? Or is it just a matter of sending the form in?
It's really just a matter of sending the form in, and that's actually something that is in the toolkit as well. Now that you say that, it reminds me that that form is in there. So, it really is just, it's a good thing to do kind of at the start of the session so we don't forget. And then you are ready to lobby and testify and all that good stuff right out of the gate.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And not being registered now, it's not session yet. Doesn't mean you can't go talk to a legislator now, but now is a great time to fill out the registration form and send it in. Celeste.
I'm looking at the lobbyist registration form, and it says, please list exactly as you wish printed in the volunteer lobbyist directory. They want the committee or lobbyist group. We write League of Women Voters of Colorado, correct?
Yep.
Correct.
We don't need to write LAC or anything like that, just League of Women Voters of Colorado.
Yep.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And the same when we register to testify.
Great.
Good questions. Jeff.
I didn't hear mention, maybe I just missed it, that there's a guidelines for lobbyists publication that they have also online. That's very helpful. I don't know if that's in the toolkit or not.
Jeff, I am not remembering offhand if it is or not. I want to say it is, but if it isn't, it should be. So I'm going to make a note. And if it's not currently in there, we will add it.
Well, one of the things on the form, it says to send it to this woman at the state senate, but they actually want in that guidelines for lobbyists, they tell you where to send the form, which is correct, I think. I don't know.
On the registration form, it says you're supposed to check off that you have received or read the guidelines for document.
Okay.
So the useful links, which is in the toolkit, has both a link to the volunteer registration form and a link to guidelines for lobbyists. So Jeff, thank you very much for bringing up the guidelines for lobbyists. If we're getting two different places we should be sending the volunteer registration form, I'd say maybe send it to both, so we are sure it gets to the person it's supposed to go to. So Kathy Wilson.
I know when I was looking through the attendees to this professional development, that there are a couple of people who didn't look like they were going to be LAC members. And I think it's really important, especially since you're talking about registering as a volunteer lobbyist, to stress that it's the LAC members who are the voice of the league in the testimony that happens. We're the authorized voice for the league, but any citizen of Colorado can speak for themselves. And I think that distinction is important to keep in mind.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for bringing that up. Yeah, LAC members, and only after LAC has approved a stance on a bill, are the only ones speaking for LAC in testifying on bills. Local leagues might authorize. Most local leagues have a procedure for who can speak for their local league or how they authorize someone to speak for their local league. So there may be some people speaking on behalf of their local league, in which case they needed to make that clear. And also let us know, because we want to speak with one voice. I just pulled up the volunteer lobbyist registration form, and it looks like from the state General Assembly site, and it looks like it still has the old address for Robin Jones. So I might send something, try to find the correct address. It's a state.co. Is it, or are they using state.co.us? I thought they were using .gov now for their emails.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
So we may want to check into that if their form is not up to date.
Yeah. So
I'll look at last year. I went through this last year. I'll look for it.
Okay. Thank you. All good questions. And we will go even deeper into wonks and details in our third meeting, January 3rd. Kathy E.
Yeah, for the new legislators, do they have a legislative email address yet, or does that not come until the legislative session starts?
I have to say I have not tried to look at an individual. I haven't looked up the individual legislators recently to say if those updates have already been made. It does seem to me, generally speaking, that the General Assembly site gets updated very quickly. But I actually don't know the answer to that question. You'll see when you go onto the General Assembly site that there's a tab for legislators, and you can look up any legislator, and that would take you to their email address. But whether or not it's got the new people yet, I don't.
I just pulled it up, and it was updated March 20th. of 2024. So the answer is, I'm guessing they have emails and we don't know them yet.
Yeah, but I'm sure we'll be seeing that soon. I'm sure by session it'll be updated.
Yeah.
They're usually very on top of that. All right. Well, that takes us to, I think, our final slide. This is just a reminder for the third and final session in the professional development series. It'll take place January 3rd, same time, 9 to 11 via Zoom. You can all get registered for that if you haven't already done so. This, as Maud mentioned, will really be kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of the tools and more of the process information that hopefully will assist you in your job as an LAC lobbyist. And it will be very near the start of the session. So our goal is to have this, fresh in your mind, so you're ready to go come January 8th, which is when the General Assembly will convene. So,
wait, sorry, Andrew, one other thing. On the volunteer lobbyist form, it asks for business address, but they're going to mail a little lobbyist card and they'll mail it to the business address unless you put a note on there, please send it to my house at 123 Main Street. So
yeah,
minor
that's a
update.
good clarification. Thank you, Maud. Okay, so I think that is all we have for you today, unless there are any last minute questions or, oh, no, I jumped ahead. I mentioned start a session, but also very important to mention first LAC meeting, the 2025 session will be January 17th. Which is Friday, 9 to 11 via Zoom. We'll be getting that Zoom link out to you all. Also in the toolkit is the updated membership list, which has got the Zoom link under the meetings tab in that spreadsheet. Again, that's kind of an evolving document as well. All of the members that we know of to date should be listed in there, as well as their issue area as we currently understand it. If you see anything associated with your name or issue area that needs to be updated, please let us know, and then we'll be adding new members should new people officially come on between now and the start of our meetings. So that information is available to you. It'll get updated as necessary. But you should have the Zoom link available there, but we'll also be sending out a reminder with the Zoom link again as it gets a little bit closer. I think with that, you've got our contact information. Should any questions pop up in the meantime. And if there are no other questions or comments, we'll give you a few minutes back in your day. And we just want to say thank you for your participation today. We are looking forward to working with you all during the 2025 session. Obviously, the work that you bring to this is so valuable, both for the league itself, but Colorado's policy development process overall. So we thank you in advance for that. And I want to wish everyone happy holidays. I hope everyone gets some much needed fun and some much needed rest before things kick into high gear.
Thank you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that Kathy E was not staying on, and I'll E her that